Everyone, I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Normally, this would be the beginning of the Takeout, but we are in rolling coverage of a breaking news situation here in the nation's capital. Just reset for those of you who are just joining us and to confirm things you may have already heard in the last few moments. 2:15 p.m. here in Washington, D.C., two members of the National Guard deployed from the state of West Virginia were shot in what is being described as a targeted and ambush-style attack 2 blocks from the White House. They are in a hospital in critical condition. The suspect apprehended, also in the hospital with severe injuries. That is the basic outline of what happened. Sam Vinograd joins me now to fill in lots of other details. We'll have Nicole Skanga, Weijia Jiang, and others joining us as we go through the day. Sam?
Well, we just learned some new information, Major. We had a press conference from federal and local officials in which we learned that one suspect allegedly walked around a corner in a heavily populated area of Washington, D.C. For our viewers who aren't from here, this is one of the most saturated parts of Washington, D.C. when it comes to law enforcement presence. You have the U.S. Secret Service, you have the Park Police, you have Metropolitan Transit Police because you have 2 metro stops and basically a 4-block radius. There's so much law enforcement here, in addition to, of course, the National Guardsmen. But the suspect allegedly, according to the press conference that just wrapped, walked around a corner and started shooting at National Guardsmen. We also learned from the press conference that this does appear to have been a targeted shooting against the National Guardsmen, which is new information. What we still don't know, and it's likely, unfortunately, going to take days, if not weeks, to understand, is whether this individual truly acted alone, whether the suspect was in touch with others about the suspect's plans, and then dialing back from that, whether there were indications that this attack was going to be underway that law enforcement somehow missed. And the benefit of digging into all of that simultaneously, Major, is to try to prevent this from happening again.
And Sam, the deputy chief of the Metropolitan Police Department, Jeff Carroll, said, based on what they know now, early stages, one perpetrator in custody, no continuous threat to the public in or around the White House. We know a couple of other things I want to let the audience know. For a brief period of time, the White House was on lockdown for medevac purposes of moving those wounded out of the area of the shooting. Reagan National Airport was briefly shut down. No flights in and no flights out. That has been lifted. So lots of things flowed instantaneously from this shooting. Again, as I want to remind our audience, just 2 blocks north of the White House complex.
Certainly, and there were some conflicting statements during the press conference. FBI Director Patel said the perpetrators of this heinous act will be brought to justice, and then the Metropolitan Police Department clarified that at this time there is one suspect in custody. So we have to wait and see whether there are other individuals that perhaps knew that this attack was being planned, or if the suspect did work with other individuals. That's a key point. Speaking
of conflicting information, and those in our audience could be understandably confused about what they've seen on their phones in the last hour, the governor of West Virginia, Patrick Morrisey, put on social media that the 2 West Virginia guardsmen had died. Then, about 15 minutes, I'm not exactly sure how much time it took, clarified that to say they're getting conflicting information. And the latest from the press conference, as you just noted, critical condition. So that conflict of information, that misinformation, whatever the intentions of the governor were, whatever he was told, and on whatever basis he confidently declared to West Virginians that these guardsmen perished, has been pulled back, and they are in critical condition.
I'm praying that the governor was wrong. Unfortunately, we saw FBI Director Kash Patel make a similar mistake in a different unfolding investigation. But in these moments, and I've unfortunately lived too many of these, there's certainly a desire to be transparent with the public. The public requires information. They deserve information. But spreading the wrong information can cause panic, can also cause a false sense of calm. So it's very important to have the facts correct in this moment. And it's really worth noting, Major, that there are about 2,000 National Guardsmen active in just D.C. alone. So right now, while this particular incident is being investigated, law enforcement and intelligence officials at all levels of government are likely working to ascertain whether there are any associated threats against other guardsmen in D.C. and elsewhere. In the aftermath of a high-profile event like this, wall-to-wall coverage, the potential for copycat attacks is also very real. That comes as Thanksgiving parades are happening, and it's a very high-threat environment even without an incident like this. So law enforcement and intelligence officials are working serious overtime right now.
Very important point, Sam. Please stay with me if you'd be so kind. Nicole Skanga joins me now from the scene. Nicole, catch us up on what you have seen, what the atmospherics are there, and the latest information you've pulled together.
Absolutely, Major. This was a chilling scene. Just to give you a sense, we're in front of a park right now. We're about 2 blocks away from the north lawn of the White House, which explains why in the moments after about 10 to 15 shots rang out initially around 2:15 p.m. this afternoon at this metro stop, again, just 2 blocks away from the White House, we saw not only the National Guard mobilize other members who were on what's called a high visibility patrol in their camouflage uniforms. We also saw MPD getting to the scene within seconds, and within minutes you could see members of the U.S. Secret Service, including those that were stationed outside of the White House, flooding in, members of their uniform division, members of the U.S. Marshals, ATF, and other federal law enforcement, including the Park Police. Just dozens of police cars were sort of streaming in behind me, as well as ambulances. And in that very small period of time, we know that at least one suspect, used a handgun. Shots rang out, about 10 to 15 shots. There were 2 members of the National Guard who were patrolling as part of the president's crime task force here in D.C., both of those members from West Virginia, as you mentioned, and they sustained critical injuries. They were transported to an area hospital, including at least one of them who was taken by medevac. The suspect also in custody right now at another area hospital, and we're told is also in critical condition. But a really scary scene just 2 blocks outside of the White House. I am told by senior federal law enforcement officials that at this time there's no nexus to threats to the president himself, to the White House, or to his staff. But this, of course, comes at a time in which law enforcement has seen an increase in the number of assault-style attacks. We know that the National Fraternal Order of Police has reported at least 58 assaults, ambush-style assaults on police year to date. The Department of Homeland Security frequently talks about threats against their federal law enforcement officials, including an over 1,000% an increase in the number of assaults against ICE enforcement agents, Major. So all of this happening at a time where not only Washington is on edge, but also the country is on edge, with the National Guard deployed not only here in the nation's capital, but President Trump also having federalized National Guard in several other cities across the country.
Nicole, I want to ask you about a couple of things you mentioned. High visibility patrol for the National Guard personnel here deployed in the nation's capital. For those in our audience who may not know what that phrase means, describe what that means, and we should let our audience know that this particular area, as Sam Vinograd pointed out, is not a high crime area in Washington, D.C. for very good reasons. It's close to the White House. Law enforcement is crawling around there all the time. So this is a highly unusual circumstance. And also, as I remembered from the press briefing just a few moments ago, the National Guard personnel who were wounded were wearing, they were armed as they were doing these high visibility patrols. Describe what they were doing.
Major, that's exactly right. This is not a high crime area. This is a high law enforcement area. This is a place where on any given day you walk on the sidewalk and you will see members of the National Guard who are deployed as part of this task force. You will see members of the Secret Service. You will see other federal law enforcement agents. Now, that high visibility patrol that we were talking about there, the motivation behind that, deterrence. This is part of the White House task force and federal law enforcement's goal of really deterring crime, of trying to bring down, more high-profile crimes like carjackings, like homicides within the nation's capital. And so oftentimes as part of that effort, we see the National Guard patrolling. You can see their weapons visible. You can see that they're wearing those sort of camouflage military fatigue-like uniforms. So there is no doubt, Major, that anyone, be it the suspect here or just a member of the public walking along the street, would have been able to identify these 2 members of the National Guard. This is the opposite of a sort of undercover operation where National Guard is intended to be seen. That's part of the idea here, to reduce crime by showing this united front. And just to give you a sense of how many members of National Guard were here and how much law enforcement was here, it was within seconds that other members of the National Guard were able to run to this scene and to respond as these shots were being fired. And our camera crews that happened to be near where all of this played out actually watched as members of the National Guard, as well as EMS and other MPD officers, actually gave CPR to at least one of the victims here in what was a really chilling and fast-paced scene, Major.
Nicole Skanka reporting from the scene. Thank you very much. I want to play sound from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth about a declaration that President Trump made to him about sending more National Guard personnel to the nation's capital as a result of this shooting near the White House. Please listen.
We will never back down. We will secure our capital. We will secure our cities. In fact, this happened just steps away from the White House. It will not stand. And that's why President Trump has asked me, and I will ask the Secretary of the Army, to the National Guard, to add 500 additional troops, National Guardsmen, to Washington, D.C.
Weijia Jiang joins us now from the newsroom here in the CBS News Bureau in Washington, D.C. Weijia, the president has, for weeks now, been describing the deployment of not only the National Guard, but the coordinated federal task force dealing with crime in the nation's capital as an unrivaled success, describing how safe the city has become. A transformation, he has said many, many times. And what is true about heinous and random violent crime is it confounds police and it confounds even a president, because it happens even with the best efforts and the most elaborate plans to keep things and people and streets safe. That has played out quite obviously today.
Major, you're right. Just yesterday at a separate event at the White House, the president spoke about this effort, what he calls a crime-fighting mission to not only eliminate but to deter future crime. In fact, he ordered the National Guard be activated back in August, even though it was met with controversy here in the nation's capital from elected officials, from local officials who have since challenged it in court. But Major, you are right in that President Trump, at every opportunity he gets when he talks about Washington, D.C., loves to talk about the pride he has in seeing these members of the National Guard, because he believes that they have been able to bring the crime down. And he has said repeatedly that he does, in fact, have the authority to activate them, not only here, but across the country, because he argues he is the commander of in chief. And so while that plays out in court, certainly they are here, they are present. In fact, he just signed an order this month to extend their presence through the end of February. And to your point that you were talking about with Nicole, these are folks that you see every single day. To get to work, we have to pass by them. We see them staged in public parks and certainly around public transit a lot, particularly this corner where the shooting unfolded, because its proximity to the White House. It's such a major hub for the metro that is where you would have to get off if you wanted to take the transit and go sightsee in that part of town. So Major, right now, I can tell you the White House and officials who I've talked with say they are closely monitoring the situation. They do not want to talk about the politics of why the National Guard is here. They are focused on the investigation and on these families who just received this horrific news, Major.
And to buttress your point, Weijia, about the reaction here in Washington, D.C., some members of the D.C. City Council were very much opposed to National Guard deployment. Mayor Muriel Bowser was cooperative to a point, saw the need and the assistance as being beneficial, maybe in a deterrent way, maybe also in a specific way dealing with some persistent crime problems, maybe some teen violence, things dealing with carjacking, the federal task force helping her in that respect. She's walked a very fine line with these deployments. And as you said, anyone walking around the White House, the National Mall, or surrounding areas sees the National Guard all the time. And for this to happen sends a very alarming signal to the White House that maybe this is not just a deterrent, but maybe they are now becoming some kind of target. We'll explore that more with Sam Vinograd and a guest from the FBI just in a moment. But any additional thoughts you might have on that, Weij?
Well, that might be the case, but that's not what we saw unfold, given what we just heard from the clip you played from Secretary Pete Hegseth. So it seems that they are doubling down on this, sending even more members of the National Guard here to the nation's capital. And if you have listened to the president, there's one thing that is for certain. He does believe that it makes a huge difference, not only here, but he wants to see it everywhere. Of course, there have been many challenges to that effort. Even here, the Attorney General for the district has filed a lawsuit which is still ongoing in court. But certainly the administration's position is that they are helpful in fighting crime. And to your other point, Major, the mayor has also conceded that, even though initially she, tried to push back, tried to fight back on this. Ultimately, we saw her evolve and say she wanted to work with the federal law enforcement agencies because there was a benefit. There was a reduction in crime.
Weijia Jiang, thank you so very much. Former FBI agent Jeff Harp joins us now. Jeff, with your permission, I want to play for you some sound from the scene we just heard a few moments ago from FBI Director Kash Patel. Let's play that.
We will work together collaboratively because this is a matter of national security, because this is a matter of pride. President Trump has been informed. We've been in contact with the White House. We will shortchange the American public with no resources to make sure we find and safeguard our nation's capital right here in Washington, D.C., and bring anyone responsible for this heinous act of violence to justice.
Jeff, evaluate that declaration that this is about national security.
Well, I mean, anytime you have an event in Washington, D.C. that involves a crime of this nature where it could affect a lot of different folks, they're going to say this is a national security level event. And I understand what he's saying, that, the FBI will bring the resources to bear because at the end of the day, they work with the same agency that prints the money. So they bring a lot of resources to help solve a case like this.
What are your thoughts based on what you've heard so far from the scene and from those involved with pulling the investigatory information together so far?
Yeah, these are very difficult because anytime you have a lone wolf operator, and I think that's what we've initially determined this to be, and that remains to be seen, these people can sometimes get radicalized on their own, whatever sort of radicalization they believe in, and they can act on their own without the involvement of others. Now, I think what we have also seen in the past that a lot of these shooters that we say, hey, there was what we call leakage, where they talk about things that happened prior to them making this horrible act. They talk about it. They post things. They obviously they go out and buy firearms, ammunition, and that sort of things. So the precursors that lead up to these events sometimes are seen by others, but a lot of times it's really, really hard to act upon it because it can be sort of nebulous in nature.
Jeff, the FBI director called this brazen. I wonder if you have any thoughts about the location of this, because the suspect, the gunman, who's now in custody and also obtaining medical treatment because of serious wounds, gunshot wounds after the fact, would have had to know not only is this a high-profile crime event, it is happening near the White House, and there would be no end of law enforcement descending upon him almost instantly.
Yeah, I mean, so they talk about suicide by cop. That's sort of the thing that went through my mind. I don't suspect this person thought they would get out of there alive. I mean, it's good that they did because we'll have an opportunity to do an interview at some point and get more information from them. The other thing that really stands out in my mind is I know that area very well. I worked in the D.C. area for about 8 years, and several blocks away from there, you have FBI headquarters, you got Secret Service headquarters, DHS. Everybody, that whole area is surrounded by a law enforcement community, not to mention the fact that the Farragut Metro stop is very popular stop for people to get off to see the White House, to walk across the lawn, to go over to see the Washington Monument and the other great features in Washington, D.C. So it's really kind of crazy that this guy got off there and committed this act because he was going to be seen. He knew he was going to be seen and certainly be shot at. I'm trying to talk to some of my sources back there to make a determination as to, they said there's about 15 rounds that were fired. It's unknown whether those were handgun, rifle rounds, or anything else at this point. Or at least we don't know it. But I think as we see this come out, we'll find out what weapon he used, the defensive measures that the National Guard used, and we'll learn more about his motives by what they found in his social media and other electronic data.
Jeff, before I let you go, would you imagine with the National Guard deployed currently and the 500 yet to be deployed, there will be a reassessment of tactics and procedures?
Yeah, there's always a reassessment. Anytime you have something like this, there's always a reassessment. You know, I was on a hostage rescue team for about 5 years, and when we responded to events, we looked at what happened and what were the learning points of what happened before when you go into a new event like this, so you don't make the same mistakes twice.
Jeff Harp, I appreciate your time very much, sir. Thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break. We are quite obviously in rolling coverage. We'll be back in just a moment with that rolling coverage. Still in rolling breaking news coverage, not the takeout. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Anna Schechter joins us now on the phone. She is senior coordinating producer for CBS News Crime and Public Safety Unit. Anna, what else do you know?
Well, I just wanted to add a little bit of context. You're talking about how much security there is close to the White House there. And just a reminder that in May, 2 Israeli embassy employees were shot outside a museum right across the street from the FBI Washington field office. So this is not the first time a shooting has been carried out in such a highly policed area, thought of as a very secure area. Now, what's interesting to me right now as well is there has been a lockdown of information flow. I imagine investigators have already begun trying to ask the suspect questions. It seems that he's likely physically able to answer those. I'm hearing that he might have had ties to the community in D.C., so not traveled in. But a lot of this is very preliminary, and that is the latest that I have, Major.
Anna, thank you so very much. Please stay with us. Sam Vinograd is still with me here at the desk, and I'm grateful that you have stayed with us. Sam, to Anna's point, so the May shooting, two members of the Israeli embassy shot and killed, that was one of the reasons the White House pointed to explain the necessity of bringing in the National Guard and this large federalized crime-fighting task force. That's point one. Point two, when Anna referred to what appears to be or feels to her as a lockdown in the flow of information, right near the end of the press briefing, some reporters asked, have you engaged in any conversation with the suspect? They didn't deal with that. How do you interpret those?
Well, on your second question regarding a lockdown in information, we've already had misinformation, perhaps. We had the governor of West Virginia release a horrifically tragic update about the reported death of the 2 National Guardsmen, only to retract it. So in this moment, they clearly want to be transparent with the public, but they also want to make sure they're getting their facts straight. That's very important. They don't want to evoke panic or a false sense of calm. Now, I will tell you, Major, having worked on counterterrorism at DHS for several years, no matter how much law enforcement you have in an area, trying to find a lone actor is worse than trying to find a needle in a haystack. So you
meaning before the fact.
Before the fact,
right.
Trying to prevent a lone actor from engaging in an act of violence is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult because if they are talking to others, it's oftentimes in dark corners of the web. And so you're having a harder time just tracking down their communications and their planning before the fact. We saw that play out in front of when the 2 Israeli embassy officials were killed, and potentially we're seeing that play out right now. And that comes to the point about the Secretary of War indicating that more National Guardsmen will be deployed to Washington, D.C., 500 more in the aftermath of this horrific event. I am just not certain that deploying more officers physically to Washington, D.C. alone is going to solve this problem. It really has to involve extensive information gathering, intelligence gathering to try to prevent this act of violence well before an individual with a gun is walking armed on the streets of Washington, D.C. And I will just add, Major, we have seen a degradation in intelligence and information gathering as there have been huge cuts to the federal workforce.
To the point about the National Guard, the deployment and these high visibility patrols, in the conversations that you ever had about counterterrorism or dealing with things in a public space, what is the debate that goes on internally about visibility versus invisibility and achieving goals from a law enforcement perspective?
Well, it's not a zero-sum game. So the fact that you have a physical presence both to deter individuals from acting and then to respond if an act of violence starts to unfold is just one piece of the puzzle. And getting right-sizing that presence should be up to law enforcement professionals, not policy professionals, individuals that are used to making those kinds of calls. But that's just one piece of the puzzle, Major. The actual act of preventing an act of violence doesn't involve armed personnel on scene. It involves very careful information and intelligence gathering. It involves prevention work in communities to try to educate people about the signs and individuals going down a pathway to violence and much more. So it's incredibly important that we have the right number of law enforcement professionals on the ground in Washington, D.C. to fight crime and potentially counterterrorism operations. But we also need other officials at the other end of the spectrum trying to prevent this stuff before it even happens.
Anna Schechter, I am told that your phone connection is slightly better. I certainly hope that's true because we want to hear every single word you have to say. Any other reporting or observations you have on what is a fast-moving and fluid situation?
Well, more surveillance footage is coming in, and we are analyzing those videos. Law enforcement is certainly analyzing those videos to look at what happened from all angles. They want to find out if there was any kind of an interaction with law enforcement before shots were fired. That is what they are drilling down on right now. Investigators are trying to get the answer to that question, so I'm hoping to get some more information on that soon. But that is another line of questioning, exactly what transpired before those shots were fired. Doesn't appear that they spoke, but they're trying to determine if he might have said something before pulling the trigger.
And Anna, to follow up on that point, when authorities, as they have described this as a targeted and ambush-style encounter, that means, from your vantage point and in the vernacular of law enforcement, for the benefit of the audience, what does that mean?
That means that law enforcement was not engaging in a mission where they had guns drawn and there was the potential to have some kind of an altercation. They were going about their business unaware that there was a threat and the attacker opened fire. So that is a targeted, intentional attack that, in law enforcement terms, many law enforcement would use the term ambush to describe that type of an attack.
Anna Schechter, our senior coordinating producer in our Crime and Public Safety Unit, thank you so very much. Sam, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, just one other thought is at this point, we don't even know if the suspect has been identified. What we've seen unfold in various investigations is, in the first instance, looking if this individual had any identification on the suspect's person. And we have seen other instances in which suspects had no ID. And so just figuring out who they were took more time. Obviously, in the case of the United Healthcare CEO's assassination, it took the public's help in identifying the suspect in that case. So at this moment, we actually just don't know if the suspect has been identified. That could be accomplished through biometric identification, fingerprints, and other matters. And the public may also be helpful in that regard. As it pertains to an ambush-style attack, you know, these National Guardsmen here in D.C., we see them all the time. Mm-hmm. They're everywhere. And they have very specific rules of engagement. Certainly being fired upon meets the threshold of engaging in a counteraction. But these individuals, the National Guardsmen, ostensibly were armed. Part of their job in crime fighting here in D.C. is to be on the lookout for potential threats. And FBI Director Patel made a very important point during his press conference, which is these individuals' training kicked in. They responded to the ambush and prevented an even worse scenario from playing out. And I think we're going to learn more about that in the days ahead.
But to that point, and I want to dig in on that just a minute, the National Guard personnel here are essentially patrollers. They are not active police detectives or going down places. They're just sort of working the perimeter of wherever they are in a visible way, again, to Nicole Skanga's earlier point, to achieve a deterrent effect. But they're not acting like cops. They're not trained like cops, and they're not invested with the authority.
Legally authorized.
Not legally
Yes.
authorized to be cops, and that's an important distinction.
Certainly.
And limiting to their role.
It is, but they are here to patrol, to look for threats, and then to alert law enforcement to
be
those
eyes
threats.
and ears.
An ambush-style attack, there are split seconds to respond. Being fired upon is probably not something that they had in their plans for the day. But according to Director Patel, and again, we're going to learn more about this, once the ambush started, training kicked in and there was a response. And we'll learn more about who responded, how and when going forward.
Sam Vinograd here with me at the desk. Anna Schechter on the phone. Thank you very much. We are going to continue with our rolling and breaking news coverage of the shooting 2 blocks from the White House involving National Guard personnel, suspect in custody, both National Guard personnel deployed from West Virginia in critical condition. We'll be back in just a moment. A devastating and awful bit of breaking news here in the nation's capital. 2:15 p.m. local time. 2 members of the National Guard deployed from West Virginia shot in what has been described by authorities as a brazen and ambush-style shooting. They are in critical condition at a Washington, D.C. hospital. The suspect in custody, wounded in a exchange of fire thereafter, also at a hospital in serious condition, we are told. Former FBI Special Agent Catherine Schweit joins me now. Catherine, walk my audience through what's going on internally at the FBI now, because it has lead jurisdictional responsibility here, but it works very closely historically with the Metropolitan Police and other federal agencies. Everyone's all on deck for this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody's on deck. I feel for the people in West Virginia who are currently on the highway, leaving food behind in their refrigerators and on their tables, and everybody there saying lots of prayers for them. But for the FBI, they're hand in hand with the law enforcement officers who are in town already. A murder that occurs in D.C. is also a D.C. jurisdictional, issue too. So there'll be federal charges and state charges if the subject remains alive and he's charged. For sure. And the most important thing is in the law enforcement team in the federal enclave of Washington, D.C., where I used to work, there are probably 20 some agencies there, and they all know how to work together. They have task forces that work together. So everybody's going to be signing out and working on their particular thing. And in the FBI's case, they're concerned about making sure that they create that federal nexus. We have a law enforcement officer who is federal, so clearly that nexus is already there. And then we're going to piece it together very carefully to make sure that we have a very, very Loctite law enforcement to the courtroom case where we have all the facts that we need in order to charge whatever we want to charge.
Catherine, the West Virginia governor said that the 2 Guards personnel died. They did not. They're in critical condition. The entire state of West Virginia and probably the entire country writ large praying for their continued ability to stay alive and medical attention, keeping them alive, and they're in the best possible place they can be for that remedy, which we all pray for. The governor then had to retract that. That's part of the difficulty in a situation like this. Sam Vinograd mentioned the imperative to be transparent, but also in that effort to be transparent and rapid and to respond rapidly, you have to get your facts straight. And this one was a bungled misstatement of fact that sent shockwaves across the country. And its retraction put this story in a very different space, a much better space, and we are hopeful for those 2 Guard personnel. Any other thoughts you have about the limited set of facts we know before us?
Yeah, I think that what you just mentioned is a kind of an example of why we really have to go and trust our law enforcement officers to gather the facts and then hold the press conferences. And I respect that politicians can do and say what they want, but you got to get the right information right, because you only get one time to do it. I would just add that, tomorrow, and you think about what we're doing tomorrow, there's a Macy's Day Parade, and tomorrow there are parades and other activities around the country. Law enforcement, rest assured, is reassessing right now everything that they're doing in fear and concern to protect not only the citizens in the United States, the people who will be at those parades, but also the law enforcement officers who are there to protect citizens.
And Catherine, Nicole Skanga brought this to our attention earlier this hour. Fraternal Order of Police underscoring the rise in targeted ambush-style shootings of law enforcement, police, federal and otherwise. That's now, it feels, part of law enforcement conversation day in and day out. How to prepare, how to adapt, how to be more vigilant. Yeah,
Major, great point, because I can tell you my data, it shows that if you look at the last 15 years, there's been a steady increase in law enforcement targeted violence. One out of every 7 incidents that we think of as targeted violence on the street, it actually is targeted against law enforcement, not to necessarily people in a school or in a mall or at a house of worship. So that's very significant. Law enforcement has had to, especially since 2010, the numbers have gone exponential in terms of targeting law enforcement, and that has to be part of their preparation. They have to know that even if and this includes fire and emergency responders, if they get a call and they're going to a scene, they may be going to the scene so they can be targeted.
And Catherine, do you have any experience or thoughts on the long-term efficacy of National Guard working in this high visibility patrolling system in urban environments? Because the FBI is there all the time, Metropolitan Police of whatever jurisdiction, always there, maybe county police are there. How about the National Guard? And does this in any way create a different kind of conversation about how useful that is, or does it create a potential of harm for the National Guard that may not have been anticipated at the front end of all this?
Yeah, I think I like a lot of law enforcement, a lot of federal officials waiting for the shoe to drop. We all were afraid that this would happen. And I know that National Guard comes in, they don't know the streets. They're not trained to be tactical, patrols in the streets in a city they don't even know. And it's its own challenge. I'm a retired law enforcement, but FBI, right? I go into St. Louis, I don't know the streets. I'm not a patrol officer. And oftentimes the people who are deployed are the younger members of the National Guard, and the value of that is visibility, right? Potential deterrence, but also risk. There are huge numbers of law enforcement already in Washington, D.C. It's not a big area. So I understand now they're talking about deploying another 500. And to me, as selfishly, I guess, as a law enforcement officer, I feel that is 500 more National Guard officers, officials who might be, National Guard soldiers who might be at risk.
Former FBI Special Agent Catherine Schweit, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We're going to continue our coverage here. We may, in fact, switch our attention to some other topics. We'll let you know that when we come back. I told you before we went to break we might come back to the takeout and other topics. Here we are. Topic, Ukraine. But the Kremlin said today it is, quote, premature to say a peace deal with Ukraine is near. Weijia Jiang joins us now. Weijia, it's been a very busy day for all of us. Catch us up on the Kremlin reaction, where the White House is, and some of the interesting things President Trump said last night on Air Force One, heading to Mar-a-Lago for the holiday.
Well, Major, the deal right now is in a really delicate state. It always has been, but especially now that the Russians have come out to say that it is premature to sign on to this very high optimism that we've heard from the White House. And it's not only Moscow, but Ukraine has also been much more measured in talking about the progress that has been made, because the sticking points that the White House says are, quote, delicate but not insurmountable are actually quite huge. You're talking about land and territory. You're talking about security guarantees, whether Ukraine will be able to join NATO, the size of its military. These are all things that, according to the Ukrainians, are weaved into who they are. So it's not going to be easy to come to a deal with Russia. But we also know that the president has deployed his top and most trusted negotiators, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and likely his son-in-law Jared Kushner, to meet with Vladimir Putin sometime next week to talk about negotiations, Major.
Weijia Jiang, thank you so very much. Here with me now, congressional reporter for Notice. Remember, that's News of the U.S., Daniela Diaz, a friend of the show. Tom LaBianco, editor and co-founder of 24/7 News, also a friend of the show. So, picking up on what Weijia just said, on Air Force One last night, the president said there's no deadline, even though the White House had made it clear that this 28-point plan, the Ukrainians had to agree to by Thanksgiving. Well, now that's no longer the case. Your thoughts, Tom?
I mean, nothing but blown deadlines. Far be it for a group of reporters to complain about blown deadlines, but
that's a cell phone, isn't it?
That's very true.
I mean, it does seem to be getting closer. I mean, we're all old enough to remember when Jared Kushner would never return to orbit.
Right.
The shadow president from the first term.
Exactly.
Well,
now a key player.
Yes.
And Daniela, what's interesting is Moscow said today, officially on the record, if Steve Witkoff comes back, please make sure he doesn't come alone. I mean, someone else comes with him. This after Bloomberg News reported an entire transcript of a conversation with Witkoff and a senior Russian official in which Witkoff is basically trying to teach them how to butter up and better position themselves in negotiations with President Trump.
From the very beginning, this has been just, in many ways, a sort of disaster. I mean, when it comes to the image that the United States is putting on and trying to negotiate this peace deal, of course, President Donald Trump really wanting this to happen, saying that the Thanksgiving holiday was going to be the deadline, and then the headlines that have come out since then. I mean, Secretary of State Marco Rubio briefing senators in Geneva saying, actually, it doesn't seem that we had anything to do with this deal. Russia wrote this. Senator Mike Rounds telling reporters these details over the weekend, and everything that has followed since. I mean, this has been, in many ways, a PR nightmare for the Trump administration and Donald Trump, who really wants to push this win by this now self-imposed deadline that's not happening.
And Tom, what the White House often says in moments like this, where there's understandable confusion and who's in charge and what's the plan, well, it's just their unconventional approach to diplomacy. And then they fall back on, well, it worked in Gaza and Israel, so, hey, give us some credit.
Okay, so I look at things in terms of capital L legacy constantly. And you can tell that clearly they don't want this to be like Biden with Afghanistan, where it becomes a negatively defining thing.
Moment, right.
Yeah. So there's the impetus for this, but to me it's so strange to, after all these years and the closeness of Putin with Trump, Russia with Trump, the Trump administration, why do you need somebody on the phone telling them how to talk to Trump? Don't they know that already?
It's not real mystery. You compliment the president. You tell him he had a great win diplomatically, Israel and Gaza. I mean, that's not some enormous secret key to unlock an unknown path of persuasion to President Trump. So it wasn't, and the president was asked about it, and he said, well, it's standard negotiating stuff, and he still trusts Witkoff, whether or not the Russians still do, because what they saw, to your point, Daniela, is they saw Witkoff come, talk, and then Rubio step in and rework the whole deal.
And Secretary of State Marco Rubio is
also National Security Advisor, we should point out.
He has all the jobs right now. He is a staunch defender of Ukraine. I mean, that's another thing to keep in mind in all of this. I've covered Rubio when he was senator. He was always defending Ukraine. He was part of that group of Republican senators. There's fewer of them now, Mitch McConnell being one of them, speaking out against this deal on social media. But he wants to see Ukraine be able to defend itself against Russia, which is why you're seeing him step in these negotiations, say the things he's saying, because he really does want to help Vladimir Zelensky.
Very quickly, we want to talk to you, Daniela, about the expiring or soon to expire Obamacare tax credits that were expanded during the Biden administration, and lots of back and forth, none of it very cooperative between the White House and House Republicans.
I mean, I think I've talked about this with you now, Major, dozens and dozens of times. I mean, this has been the story for months, and this is why the shutdown happened. And as we heard from President Donald Trump recently, he admitted, I do think we got to do something about extending the Affordable Care Act subsidies now that he's probably gotten information about truly how expensive this is going to become after the end of the year for Americans. We've run out of time on the Hill to address this. I mean, there is just no way that they're going to be able to address this when they're back next week, even though we are hearing that there's going to be some sort of negotiation on this.
Tom, you've got 1 minute. If there is a deal, it's going to have to be put together very quickly. It might be a 1 or 2 year extension and then details to come later. And if that happens, that would go like that.
I mean, lickety split.
Republicans wouldn't like it, but there'd be the votes for it, right, Daniela?
I mean, there's enough of them.
Yeah, I keep saying it, that, the dynamics changed so much after the election results a few weeks ago. Because now you have a sense of the sentiment. You see Kevin McCarthy talking about people getting ready to leave, all right? People looking down the road. This is the same thing that's happened with the Indiana redistricting, where people are worried. Everybody's worrying about their own future now.
Right.
And I think that is what's driving so much of this.
An unusual, difficult day here in Washington, D.C. We got to some other topics. I appreciate you both for helping us do that. Tom LoBianco, Daniela Diaz, thank you very much. Back to the breaking news that we've been tracking this entire hour. 2 National Guardsmen are in critical condition in the hospital after being shot just blocks from the White House. There is a suspect in custody who is also injured. Please stick with CBS News 24/7 for the latest updates throughout the evening. The Daily Report will pick up our coverage after a very quick break.